Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to AIQRATE webinar specials, the CXO series. Today's topic is Reset Digital Transformation Strategy, the new playbook. And joining us today is Lux Rao, Senior Director and Head Digital Transformation at NTT India. To moderate this session, we have Samir Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder, AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Request all to be on mute throughout the webinar for uninterrupted listening experience. Saying that we still love to hear from you, so you are welcome to use the chat window for sharing your thoughts with us and all participants. You may also use this chat window for sharing your questions to be taken up for Q&A. We are recording this webinar, and the recorded webinar will be available on our website, www.aiqrate.ai. I would now like to introduce today's guest. Lux Rao is a Senior Director and Leader for Solutions and Digital Transformation at NTT India. As a leader for the digital business, Lux is responsible for devising the strategy and approach for NTT's foray in digitally enabling organizations across sectors and industries. Prior to NTT, Lux was heading the Digital Transformation Office at Cisco to drive digital transformation agenda for Cisco and help customers across various verticals, including healthcare, manufacturing, BFSI, retail, smart cities, etc., define their digital journey. Lux has been awarded the prestigious IDC Award for Excellence in Innovation for the year 2015, Best CTO Digital Transformation for the year 2015 by Tech Plus Media, and the coveted Technology Evangelist for the year and industry recognition for 3 years in a row. Lux is part of the NASSCOM Task Force for Digital Transformation. He is also the co-chairman for FICCI Committee on Smart Cities and is on the Technology Advisory Board for IDT, Factory of the Future, Industry 4.0, Geospatial IoT and AI, and other organizations. Lux, it's a pleasure. Thanks for making time to be in our CXO series. I will now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, the session is yours now. Thanks.
Thanks, MK.
Thanks, MK, for the introductions. Lux, it's a pleasure to have you at our session. And I must say, I think digital transformation and your experience overall in terms of how you've kind of consulted, advised, many of those situational scenarios in digital would be handy for this session. So would love to take your nuggets of insights and experience in this particular session. Just to get the ball rolling, Lux, last 100 days, if I just take from the time most of the geographies have got into the lockdown phase, has been, I would say, most unpredictable for any corporate to be into. The situations have turned out to be much more hypothetical, and the business plans have gone for a toss completely. In that scenario, most of the corporates, most of the organizations are also talking about that, look, digital transformation needs a reset. Strategic models and the associated business plan needs, again, a rejuvenation and a resurrection. So from your vantage point, and you speak to a lot of prospects, you speak to a lot of global companies and their CXOs, what winds of change on a strategic side are you experiencing and what you're hearing? And what's happening in the overall corporate scenarios as far as overall digital adoption or transformation is concerned?
Right. Thanks, Samir. Thanks, MK, for the generous introduction. Samir, you're right. I think, this event will actually go down, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic kind of a scenario. Unprecedented times, and no organization actually would have planned for this kind of a situation ever. And all of this actually was there when organizations, really wanted to look at, how can they overcome the situation that was in. Immediately after the lockdown was announced, I don't think there was actually a lot of gap.
Lux, you're not audible.
There is some network error at his end, Samir. I think he'll be fixing it.
Okay.
Give him a minute.
Can we please have all the participants just go on hold for some time? We'll just have Lux log in again.
I'm back. I'm back, Samir.
Go ahead, Lux. Sorry, we lost you for a minute, so you may have to say that again, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. It just fluctuated a bit. So I was saying that, unprecedented times, and many organizations, were facing a situation that they couldn't really have planned for. And I think in the immediate few days after the announcement, many organizations that I was actually talking to, they felt, and I'm actually saying this, in absolute candor, they felt that, hey, look, I think we've got our BCP in place, and BCP will kick in, and we are ready, and nothing will actually affect us and stuff like that. I can say with certainty that no organization could have planned for this kind of an effect where, or the best of actually BCPs wouldn't really stand in an organization in good stead. Let me just explain this to you. Most BCPs that were planned were considering about 15% and a max of 20% workers actually working from home. And this is one aspect of it. And suddenly you had 100% of the workforce, supposedly to be working from home. And what happened? I think it was actually, absolute hysteria. There was pandemonium because you had to actually enable thousands, hundreds of workers, to actually work from their own respective homes. The best of BCP plans laid waste. We didn't really know what was actually happening. And I think, as it actually evolved, people started realizing that, the BCP plans were actually, designed keeping scenarios in mind that were not really taken into consideration this kind of a pandemic. What exactly does this mean? Perhaps actually people felt that, if there is actually, some kind of a natural calamity that affects a certain area, then let's actually, kickstart the operations from another place, like what happened with Hurricane Katrina that actually ravaged the coast in the US, and then they shifted their operations to another city and started working. Or when actually Chennai was flooded, the entire operation shifted to actually another city, and then they started actually working. But here you had actually, most of the globe on lockdown mode. So what would you actually do? Offices were not really supposed to be accessed. You had a government regulation which prevented people from going, and all for good reasons. And organizations were really grappling to look at, what could we do? Many organizations did not even have, were not even equipped with providing actually endpoint devices, computers actually for their people to access, when they were at home. That was actually the response phase in the first few weeks, 3 to 4 weeks time, when people did not know really what hit them. And then actually reality started coming in, and the whole concept of digital transformation. And I think, when organizations look at digital transformation true to the spirit of digital transformation, Samir, they would have actually planned for something like this. Ideally they should have planned. But like I said, I don't know of any organization, and I meet hundreds of clients. I don't know of any organization that was extremely well equipped to actually handle this kind of a scenario. So they went back to the drawing boards, and then this whole notion of digital transformation came about. As we speak, there's a polarized position on digital transformation, whether it's accentuated or it's punctuated. Is digital transformation an important part of the agenda or not? The jury was out. People did not want to be bothered about digital transformation simply because they felt that, digital transformation is this really fancy thing and stuff like that. Digital transformation also actually has got, is got some kind of a bearing, and the way actually they responded, from a digital transformation perspective, has a bearing on, the types of organizations. I'll cover that in a little bit from now, but let's get back to the story about, how organizations actually responded. So there were some organizations which went, shopping. They went and picked up hundreds of laptop computers because, most of their employees, particularly the low-level knowledge workers, were actually, working on, thin clients in their offices. So they never were planned to, access, this from home. You had network issues. You had systems actually, particularly the VPN and the VDIs. The VPN was actually not, designed for actually this kind of a load. suddenly you saw that, a lot of planning that went into creating, the secure tunnels of communication between an endpoint and actually the data center of the organization, was not able to handle the load. And then actually creative solutions came about. I'll relate to one example of this. When actually talking to one of the most well-known banks in the country, we were discussing about, how do we actually enable, their thousands of employees actually, to work from home. While endpoint was actually designed, and this particular organization decided that they will actually allow their employees to access their own home computers as well. So home computers actually, which were their personal computers, because they had speed was of essence, and they had to actually come onto the grid, so to say, instantly. And this meant that they actually with a network, with an endpoint device, which is a computer, their own personal computer, they were logging in and transacting data that was actually confidential. They were dealing with with their own customers' data, with the people who were actually banking with them, and all of this was actually happening on channels that were actually arguably not secure. So, and this was, therefore, this kind of actually expanded the threat landscape in a significant way. So the first problem was about connect. And somehow, people actually, got together, decided that, we'll actually have some kind of a patchwork solution, a band-aid solution, and then, get things going. The band-aid solution, provided some level of connectivity. So that was done. Then actually what hit like a sledgehammer was the security threat. The threat landscape expanded, phenomenally. So what I'm actually saying by this is suddenly you had hundreds of thousands of devices which were not actually in the firewall, so to say, in a secure kind of an environment. Almost actually 100% of the employees were accessing from home with such a level of threat landscape exposed. Now it became very, very imminent that threats would actually will be coming in a very big way, and it happened.
So, Lux, if I may chime in,
Yeah.
so as I pick up the word what you use very nicely, the spirit of digital transformation.
Yeah.
Now, so just before this pandemic, there was this situation that there were some laggards. There were some people or other enterprises in a more of a cogitation mode, and there were some who were absolutely digital native or kind of really in a mode of a digital mode, as we call it. Now, fact over there is one aspect is beyond the realms of remote work management, endpoint security, and all those VPNs. There is also this facet of the change of business models around digital transformation. And some benchmarkings really coming in last 100 days and saying, look, this is how digital transformation works now. Because there is no option. You got to be, let's say, virtual and give that experience to customers virtually, which is more like personalized, curated, define a new kind of a business value chain, and maybe kind of start innovating new product and services, but all under the realms of digital transformation. How do you see this entire thing in terms of what I call digital transformation mechanics and kind of benchmarks coming in from here on? So are you referring that, okay, things from here will be much more concrete in terms of clients and organizations saying, look, this is how the digital transformation needs to be panned out? Or you believe there is some new model in the making?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, Samir, thanks for bringing it. This was actually the one that I was referring to when I said that, there are different types of organizations. Actually, a study says that there are 4 types of organizations. And I love the study simply because it actually kind of, you can start, looking at the construct of such organizations, and I'll relate all of them. When digital transformation itself was actually in a very hot buzzword, and many organizations were actually, trying to look at, what this is all about, and they were looking at, what they could do. The 4 types of organizations that emerged were actually, they were the beginners who were actually very keen, very interested in what digital transformation can do to them. So they were all starry-eyed about the potential of digital. They're all starry-eyed about, a better customer engagement or a client engagement. And they felt that, this is actually a silver bullet to, expand, increase their market share, solve problems and stuff like that. They're the beginners. The beginners are actually very well signified by the proof of concepts they do. And proof of concepts are actually essentially those, there's just a proof of concept, and that doesn't really mean that's mainstream to your business, which is the reason why they're actually in the quadrant of beginners. There are another set of, organizations who are conservatives. So they always question really, why digital transformation? Is it actually for the sake of digital transformation, or digital transformation is actually meaningful for me? The conservatives are those organizations who are successful in business, who have a rock solid process in place, and they're now looking at what could actually help them enhance their own offerings, better operational efficiencies, better customer engagement, and things like that. Typically, conservatives are those who are actually looking at digital as an overlay to actually do better at what they're doing. That's a conservative set of customers. Okay. The third category of customers, and this is actually something very interesting, and we can all relate to this. These are the fashionistas. The fashionistas who actually look at digital for the sake of digital. For them, nirvana is not really looking at operational efficiencies, better customer connect, or empowering the employees. It was always about actually being seen among the swish crowd. For them, actually, news bites was everything. Seeing as digital was everything. And without naming any organizations, I can tell you, in conversations I've actually had, they said that, we have done digital transformation. And what exactly does that mean? There's a proof of concept at play, which is actually, just a little pilot that's happening. And this particular proof of concept actually isn't really digital in many senses. But the fashionistas are actually happy for the sake of going digital, they've gone digital. That's actually fashionistas. The fourth one is it's the category that's shown the most resilience in this pandemic. They are actually the digital natives, or the digerati. These organizations have actually done digital and changed the world in many ways in terms of the business models that they've actually gone in with. So these are the four types of organizations. Now it's anyone's guess, what happens to these organizations. Digital natives were absolutely rock solid, standing ground, helping many other organizations. An example of that is the hyperscalers. The organizations which actually offered cloud services came to the rescue of many organizations because their data centers were running, their operations were running, and they were able to actually switch some of the services to cloud mode and kept not only their organization running, but many enterprises running. So their resilience was actually built in. The fashionistas, as anyone can imagine, actually, just shoved the entire project actually, down the pipes because, it was not really giving them any value. And the boardroom discussion was primarily about, we spent X amount of money, and I've sat in some of these uncomfortable discussions, Samir, I can say it on a first person account. They said that, we invested actually X amount of money. Is it actually helping us retain customers? Is it helping our cash flows? Is it actually helping us, stave off any security threats and stuff like that? So the answer actually was no, because this was not production grade. It was only pilot. The beginners actually felt they were the confused lot. They were looking at, should I put everything on hold or not? And I'll come to your the question that you asked me in a bit. The conservatives actually felt that, hey, this is actually helping us, stand ground. So let's actually, continue doing what we are doing, which is, continue with the projects, but do it actually, extremely diligently, and therefore we'll pick up the projects. In short, what digital transformation actually promised or assured initially was the four values, right? The first value was customer experience, a better way of connecting with customers. The second value was actually, employee transformation or workforce transformation. How do employees actually work better? This was actually pre-pandemic. I'm talking about all these actual values pre-pandemic. The third one was actually about governance, risk, and compliance. It's the business of keeping the business in business. If you actually, are not compliant, actually, secure, then chances are that, you will not be in business. It's actually basically, inviting folks to come in and actually, ravage your landscape and things like that in terms of the security. The last one is really, doing things better, which is actually, what IT has been standing for the past many decades now. So what has changed now? I am a firm believer that digital transformation has actually got, accentuated. It's not punctuated. There's no stop here. The most important thing we have to realize is that the lens with which we are seeing digital transformation is now transformed. What it means is, what's important now? The number one priority now is actually about, securing our enterprise. So security, which is the governance, risk, and compliance pillar, which I talked about, is critical. Cybersecurity is not a compromise. It has to be the best of the best that will keep an enterprise running. The second one is actually about collaboration, providing near real experiences, like the way we are actually speaking now. One of the interesting things that I've actually seen is that many organizations, many CIOs, initially they were actually a little reluctant to, do business on video because video was actually a fancy, but most of them have actually accepted. I use the commonly used euphemism now, which is the new normal, but this is the new normal, and people have actually started accepting it. We've started actually, even getting digital, or e-purchase orders, if you will, which typically used to be ceremonious earlier on, even with government organizations. So we have actually, picked up, purchase orders actually on a remote basis, which meant that, which I'm talking about actually organizations that were not really, that you used to actually provide, a proper purchase order and things like that. Even those organizations have actually warmed up to that. So the collaboration where employees can actually work, talk to each other, work with each other, even if actually they're, separated by many kilometers, is actually something that has come into fore in a very big way. So the video solutions, the collaboration solutions, working together solutions, these actually have become very, very important. And that's the reason. And I don't have to overstate this. We all have seen how these solutions have actually gone significantly higher. Microsoft talks about actually certain hundreds of percentages increase, or Cisco talks about how actually their WebEx solutions have actually gained ground and things like that. That's the second one. The third one, actually, which has taken gained ground, is in terms of employee productivity. How do we actually ensure that the employees are as productive at home as they are at office? Now, this is actually an area which has come under a tremendous amount of discussion and debate, because you have now tools that can actually help employees register their work, as well as actually help organizations track the employees' productivity. So these are some of the things that have actually gone in. And if I break it down a little bit, and I'll just take another 30 seconds more, the solutions that actually are coming into fashion now, which we are seeing in close quarters, are actually the VDI solution. The VDI solution is actually essentially the virtual desktop infrastructure that is, our desktop as a service that has actually come into its own in a very big way through cloud services. We also have the VPN solution that's providing actually secure encrypted tunnels or channels for communication between, remote employees and actually the organization, even for, those applications that are actually, supposed to be on-prem or actually, core to that organization. I take a pause here and actually, look to see if you have a question around this, Amir.
So I think you gave a very good rendition about this 4-quadrant approach in terms of the adoption scenario, and also I think what I could hear, and I'm sure our participant also gained, was more about that. Look, it's not just getting one pivot of business or one vector of business going. It's also about the whole assimilation of the business scenarios and the challenges, and then coming together with a holistic solution. And that's exactly what maybe this black swan or pandemic will actually accelerate in terms of organization thinking about a holistic digital transformation solution, then a kind of a, let's say, ad hoc or more like a random exercise. At the same time, Lux, I have a question which predominantly also comes in many of these conversations, specifically with the CXOs and CIOs as a community, that look, we're talking about digital transformation. Eventually, it's a constellation or amalgamation of new age technologies. Put AI, put IoT, or let's say cybersecurity, cloud, and you get that whole kind of a, let's say, problem sets going in terms of, is it what we are talking about, this whole assimilation technologies, or this is much more beyond?
So I think you brought about a very, very valid point, and this actually is like a day in my at office for me. When I say at office, working from home, it's a day at work for me. I think we try. It has actually got to be from the drawing board. It has to be grounds up. It cannot be actually a preconceived notion that I have to actually go the AI way or the IoT way. I think digital transformation is actually being enabled primarily with you attempting to solve a problem rather than actually throw a couple of technology tools, and that's actually a fashionista way of thinking. So I would say that cloud, for example, actually is resilient. It brings in actually a tremendous amount of value, and which explains why many enterprises are moving a lot of their workloads to cloud. Simply because it's resilient, it's standing, it is actually giving them services, and therefore it is accelerating the momentum of workloads actually moving to the cloud. So that's actually one of the things that's there. Now, on top of that, if you want to actually derive better business value, better customer experience, you may want to actually go in for an AI layer. If you want to actually manage your assets better, you will actually go in for an IoT-based solution. So I would say that the stack will actually emerge from you starting off from defining what the problem is, including actually what the pandemic has thrown at us. Once you start from there, and I think it's a different world that we are looking at, right? The lens has actually changed completely now. So we are saying that, it's today actually about, how do we ensure that the enterprise is actually, first of all, responding, after that recovering, and then actually, building in resilience. And these three R's, and probably, you're hearing it not for the first time from me. But these three phases are actually defining how enterprises are responding. The response phase is actually, over. I think, many organizations have figured out a way actually through Band-Aid, through patchwork, through some planning on how to actually respond to the pandemic. And you hear a lot in the news about, how a significant percentage of workforce is actually going to work from home. And therefore, this is actually a semi-permanent kind of a scenario. This will continue. The percentages may vary, but people are not going back to office actually, in any hurry now. The recovery phase is actually when, the organization has actually stood up and now it has got to actually get back to business. If you see the digital natives, they are actually really, making a big thing about, communicating the fact that, contactless deliveries, you take for example, or you take actually any of the e-commerce players, they talk about, contactless delivery. They talk about actually, people, their agents actually, maintaining a safe distance, social distancing and stuff like that. Now, this is actually fine because it's just a transaction. How does a manufacturing organization actually, ensure, social distancing on the shop floor? How can you ensure social distancing when people have to work in a factory? This is really where technology is coming into play. You'd be amazed to know how technology solutions are coming to fore when on the shop floor, people just wear an RFID tag with a little sensor built in. That's IoT at play for you. The moment, a worker comes close to another worker, there's a friendly beep that goes off, because people are also interested in taking care of their own safety and health. So the little beep that goes off, which says that, you're too close for comfort, and then people step back a little bit and then continue conversing. So technology has actually been a great savior in terms of how it has been enabling some of these transformations. So to answer your question, there's no preconceived notion about what technology will work, but go back to the drawing board, look at what problem you're solving, build the stack from there, and look at actually some of these tools like IoT, AI, and things like that that will actually help you in the recovery phase. And the third phase is resilience. The moment we do this, we now need to start planning better. Like I said earlier, I started off saying that most of the BCPs actually were laid to waste. So BCPs are now back to the drawing board, and many organizations are actually really looking at it very, very critically. They're looking at how BCP solutions need to really factor in some of these elements which were never thought of, or swan events, if you will.
So, if I may actually pick up what you said, this whole resiliency in the system today, which is still getting developed, will also, what I say from my side, coax and nudge corporates to kind of really say that, look, maybe this is the new norm. And this is how, when it comes to the processes, people, and kind of, let's say, the situations in terms of a day-to-day scenario, will work more from a kind of a side where it will be more reset than something, put together. Switching gears, Lux, I have a question which is pertinent, and I'm sure many of the participants would love to hear. And I'm trying to also blend one of the questions which came in. Now, what's happening on the service and consulting provider side in terms of scenario today? Of course, now the market pie has to be kind of really jostled in terms of everyone coming in with a new set of capability solutions and value props. But these are the three things which are getting emerged. I'll just give those scenarios. One is we have the run-of-the-mill IT players, consulting players in the market today. Don't want to name, but everyone knows about them, small, mid-size, and the larger ones. The second one is the cloud providers who have come in, the Amazons or the Microsofts or Oracles. And there is a whole bunch of, rather a suite of kind of a solutions they're trying to talk about putting on the cloud and enabling that for the corporates and enterprises. Third, very recently, is this, as you also know, you are well aware of this, data centers in India set up. Data centers are also trying to create infrastructure, which means not only it's just a hosting or a kind of a storage, but a scenario where they can actually have a corporate run their entire digital transformation exercise. Of course, it's in the making. Now, given these three facets emerging, there'll be a big change in terms of how digital transformation solutions and capabilities are sold, are kind of marketed, and also how it's consumed by the organizations. What's your view around this? How this scenario, maybe 6 months, 12 months down the line, will evolve? And would love to hear if you believe there are some best practices which needs to be kind of internalized for providers and consulting firms on this.
No, absolutely. And I think this is a very relevant question, given the scheme of things that we are in. Let's start with actually, looking at, what's the biggest priority for organizations right now? Cash is king. Cash flows are actually very, very critical to run the business. And therefore, it is causing it is getting translated into, requirement that actually is being put as a demand for the service providers. Let me just actually illustrate this a little bit. CapEx models are actually quickly, turning over into OpEx models. I think most organizations, including our clients, have been actually, asking if we can, transform whatever we've been proposing into OpEx models. They want to really see how it pans out. They want to kind of actually not commit to a particular technology or a deployment immediately. They want to actually see how it goes, and therefore, they're looking for an OpEx model. They're also actually, looking for a land and expand approach. What I mean by land and expand is that the big, massive, flip the switch, mega transformation projects are actually on the back burner now. Now, there are actually projects which are actually low-hanging fruit. I hate the term, but actually, the low-hanging fruit, which are, those which can actually show some benefit immediately and keep the thing moving. Important for an organization to actually, protect its assets, keep the innovation journey going, and also make sure that, they stay in business. And that's the reason why you have this, land and expand approach going. I was talking to a CIO of a large manufacturing organization, and the gentleman, was actually sharing with me. I just actually spoke to him probably in the 8th week after the lockdown was announced, and this gentleman said, Lux, we had about 80 processes that we had identified as part of the digital transformation journey, which is digitization, transformation, technology, rip and replace, a lot of things that they had a. And this gentleman was actually the chief digital officer. He had come on board to actually drive these initiatives. And I said, so what happens now? And his response was actually interesting. He says that, 80 is not happening, that I can tell you for sure. What will happen is that we are right now in the midst of an exercise where we are identifying the top 12 things that we will do. The organization has got a certain amount of money, and the board has decided that they will do everything to remain relevant to their customers. They would want to actually invest and channel all of the funding in building tools that will actually help their customers to connect better. So for example, they set up a digital presence. What was actually predominantly a brick and mortar retail, they realized that this is not going anywhere. So they wanted to actually, replicate some of the key values of, what the e-commerce players were doing. So they actually started, setting up a marketplace and actually looking at ecosystem partnerships and alignments and stuff like that. So the whole customer experience piece was becoming very, very paramount for them, was becoming very critical for them. The second thing they decided, and this is actually what he was sharing with me, their priorities was, how do we actually, get employees to work from home? Manufacturing is a segment where 70% of the people or 80% of the people, always have to be actually on the shop floor or in the office and things like that. What he said was actually very, very interesting. He said that, 20% of the employees who are actually in corporate or support functions can work from home now. But all my workers, the factory workers, they can't do anything virtually. They have to do things physically. And you can't do anything about it, So they actually started, looking at what the priorities are. So his question to me was, how can you enable these priorities of mine on a model that will not actually, take away all my IT budget? Can you come up with an OpEx model? So the business models are actually pivoting in a very big way, both for the customers as well as actually for the service providers and the consultants. So this is actually happening. There's a fair bit of pressure actually on the smaller and the mid-tier organization service providers, simply because and I say this actually cautiously, but it's a fact. Most of them actually, their cash flows actually are hand-to-mouth existence. They will not be able to survive actually a 3 or a 4 month period of actually cash not coming in. And these organizations are under immense pressure because they don't have the flexibility or the credit rating to raise money in the market to start offering as a service. So these organizations will actually be either easy picking for acquisition, or they need to actually bring in funding to start offering services. They need to actually offer whatever they are offering as a value as a service. As a service is actually something that we'll hear very, very frequently, Samir. And organizations have to actually really start thinking in that area. One organization actually even started thinking, and this may be actually a little bit of a oxymoron here, but they actually looked at this as actually, how can innovation as a service be provided? And just to actually demystify innovation as a service, they wanted to actually get their idea in place with someone who could provide the service, essentially a proof of concept center, and they will actually test it out. If it's successful, they do actually profit sharing or revenue sharing. If it is not successful, then they just pay for whatever they've used for and actually get out of that innovation. That to me actually appealed as one end of a spectrum of how organizations are actually thinking today. And most important, service providers and consultants have to start thinking and keep in pace with it. One commonly used term that gets bandied about quite a lot, Samir, is actually something called automation. Automation is being generally used as a a silver bullet that will solve all the problems. In reality, I think organizations have to start looking at what projects to automate. You can't actually churn the ocean with automation as a story, and automation also has to be dealt with a lot of empathy. Automation cannot be actually taking away jobs. It has to be actually on a very blended hybrid model, which is actually it is called as the human machine interaction. So it needs to actually have this blended hybrid perspective for organizations looking at how they can make it actually from human element to actually a blended machine human element. Sorry.
Just thinking around what you said, Lux, one of the very good, I would say, narrative you had was about this innovation as a service. And I'm trying to pick that because as a value accretive for digital transformation, often it's been misconstrued that the processes will go completely, or rather will get redefined, or we will have a complete transformation. Of course, that's the eventual utopian path organizations, corporates need to take as part of leveraging the digital transformation. But it's a journey, it's a continuum over there. In your experience, how have you seen clients going through this journey? Because at some level, and this is something what I have heard and would love to hear your thoughts. Okay, why don't we build up a kind of a center of excellence, housing the best of the technologies? We'll do some quick POCs, ad hoc kind of, let's say, experiments, and let's see how it goes. On the other side, there are also actually things around, okay, can we redefine some of our business functions, maybe marketing, maybe supply chain, or let's say HR or other processes? And also third, sometimes it's also, okay, tell us how this frameworks work. What's that kind of, let's say, best practice? And within that, I'm trying to layer it up, Lux, is this quintessential aspect of who decides the budgets for digital transformation. CIO, CDO, Chief Analytics Officer, and if that's not enough, we've got business heads as well. And the reason I'm putting that across to you, you've dealt with, in your interactions with multiple CXOs, CIOs. Help us resolve this particular predicament, which often comes in as part of, I'm sure, this dialogues and conversations.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of a center of excellence is actually, basically dipping the toes in water to see, how much actually they can, jump in. Is it all in, or do we actually, take it in a phased approach? I think center of excellence is actually a comfortable mid position where organizations actually test out processes, test out automation, test out new technologies to see if they can go the whole hog or not, right? And center of excellence also brings in actually talented people into a room without actually, any burdens of actually, reporting relationships and all that for them to actually, contribute in a productive way, right? I think all along, and I guess actually, IT has got a lot to blame for itself for this. Center of excellence has actually turned out to be, typically, power pawns. People actually said, I have a center of excellence that is actually running. So let me see, how much I can actually channel and, pass through this and stuff like that. So the budget decisions actually around center of excellence is actually, a very interesting conundrum, if I can use that word. On one side, there is a business owner who actually is looking at sheer business outcomes. He or she is actually looking just at, hey, look, I actually have a process that is, got a fair bit of lag. We have a fair bit of actually latency or lag in it. When I actually, pass it on to a center of excellence, these guys, the magicians, will do their magic on it. And, what comes out will actually, help me better connect with my customers, cut down actually on, supply chain lead times and, stuff like that. So this is really, what the business owner is actually thinking. And most often, the business owner actually, funds the entire project, right? The CIO comes in because the CIO's take this is that, hey, look, I think I'm responsible for anything that's actually got to do with IT, and most center of excellence actually have an underpinning of IT. It's always technology tools that actually have provided this, the fundamental basis for transformation, right? So he or she is actually looking at, whether this is in line with actually my larger IT vision or roadmap and things like that. So that's actually where they come in. And then you actually have a new animal, which is the chief digital officer who's come in. And chief digital officer is actually a blend of business and IT, or at least that's actually what they're supposed to be. And in the ultra glam years, in 2018 or 17 and 18, when actually the CDOs were coming about, most of the CDOs actually, in fact, 7 out of 10 CDOs, in a survey that I did in my previous organization, Cisco, 7 out of 10 CDOs came in from a marketing and a business background. So they did not have an IT background. And there was actually a fair bit of turf war that actually happened between the CDO and actually the CIO in terms of, who should control what and stuff like that. So to actually really look at what's happening in the real world, the CIO is an important stakeholder, if not the decision maker on anything that's got to do with the center of excellence. I believe that, customer experience, better customer connect, anything that's got to do with customer engagement is actually a is a hot button actually for many organizations. The second one is actually the obvious supply chain thing. How do we actually, make my supply chain sharper? And the current context is actually making it even more relevant, Samir, because the supply chains are now moving closer. Because of this, entire countries actually shutting down their borders, is becoming therefore very, very important. The meaning of hyper local is actually taken on a different meaning altogether now. Hyper local is actually, becoming critical. So it actually begs the question: is the world flat? Thomas Friedman actually, way back when he actually talked about the world is flat, he was looking at, what was actually happening. Now, anything that's actually consumed within the, or actually gets manufactured in the country, generally is actually seen as to be consumed in the country. So supply chains are actually, and if you look at what's happening with the government as well, the government of India, that is, the Atmanirbhar campaign that's actually being talked about, which actually is about self-reliancy, is essentially, encouraging the local providers to actually start manufacturing over here. And then some of these are actually politically driven, right? You actually now need to declare, I think from the 1st of August, if I'm not mistaken, the point of origin for goods and stuff like that. So that is actually putting, and it's the same across the globe. You see that therefore the hyper local is actually taken on a different meaning, and the supply chains are actually moving closer to the origin, not actually, the global lines that used to be there earlier. So they're actually becoming more and more local.
So one point over there, Lux, I want to chime in and take, because it's crucial as part of the narrative from your side. Startups. I think there is a great kind of emphasis what's been given to startups in terms of enhancing the digital transformation journey. And it's always a kind of a question for larger corporates or enterprises to say, look, can we actually inorganically do something with the startups, or kind of really curate something in our own backyard? And it's tough kind of a conversation, or it's tough kind of a decision making to happen. But having said that, startups have come in very uniquely positioned from a vantage point and saying, look, I'll take one sliver of the problem, solve it, solutionize, and kind of pick it up, or you can pick it up and kind of implement in your organization with full stream. Yeah. Will that change with this kind of a scenario coming in, or do you believe that this will further get more enhanced?
It'll get enhanced. So my short answer, it'll get more enhanced, simply because the startup actually, provides the flexibility of trying out something without actually being a burden on the organization's resources. So you could actually, bring in a startup. And there's this interesting term that I came about, talking to many startups, this whole new concept of actually captive startups emerging.
Say that captive startups. Captive startups.
Captive startups. The meaning of a captive startup is actually you got a startup, and they're actually, fundamentally catering to a certain organization, and they are actually captive to that organization, and they get funded to a fair degree actually from the enterprises. So in some sense, without actually having these people on the rolls, without going through the organization rigmarole of actually, getting them on board, employing them, you got this little offshoot, which becomes actually in many ways a center of excellence. They become the catalyst for enabling digital transformation. So the captive startups, I think, is actually coming up in a big way. I was talking to I mentor a few startups, and it was becoming a pattern. I thought the first one actually, was just an exception. But when two startups actually came back and said, this organization actually wants to really, book our time for the entire period. They want us to actually work only and focus only on what we are doing. And for a moment, actually, if it's successful and if it's actually successfully implemented, they don't want to own the IP. They are not actually laying any claim on the IP. It's just that they need hands and feet support and catalysis of actually what's happening into their organization first, which means they want to actually own the entire process before letting the startup actually go and do stuff outside. And if it's a voluntary call, the startup can decide to do or not to do, it's their choice. But this kind of thing is actually coming up increasingly. So this whole concept of captive startup is, I mean, this is actually just a simple usage of word. A captive startup is essentially a startup that actually works directly with one organization and actually catalyzes the whole process of digital transformation. This, I think, is actually going to start becoming more and more predominant actually as we move forward. Samir.
Great, great. I want to take one question, and this is something even in this current times, it's relevant, Lux. It's about the whole digital transformation maturity model. There are books, there are dossiers, there are those playbooks, but nothing comes, I would say, in front of someone who's really interacted, done that kind of a thing, and really evangelized in terms of how this entire journey looks like. In your own words, how would you say a usual digital transformation maturity model looks like? What are the pivots? What are the elements? And how it should be taken in a progressive manner end to end, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is a very, very important topic as well. And there are many treatises, many books, many analyst articles that talk about different types of digital maturity models, right? Digital transformation maturity models. I think, what starts off actually, as a process is, really this, let's call it actually as a pilot. You have this whole idea of actually, how it can work for me. So identification of the business processes and streamlining them becomes very important. Let's actually call that the standardization process. It also actually gives an opportunity for organizations to look at the processes, see, what is actually relevant for them, and look at, what needs to actually, what will give the biggest bang for the buck, so to say. So the standardization of processes will also help, irrespective of digital transformation, it will also help them actually beef up some of the processes that have actually got deltas and latencies actually built in there. After standardization comes optimization. So optimization is actually essentially an element where you see 2 or 3 different processes, look at all the overlaps that are actually there, and then you start actually putting all of that together and seeing what works. You have not employed any technology tool yet. You are actually looking at what you could do in terms of your own processes. You remember the 4 quadrants that I talked about initially? I talked about the beginners, I talked about the conservatives. People who do these 2 steps actually are the conservatives. They look at the processes, they clean up the processes before actually they go digital in many senses. So after the optimization element has actually happened, which is actually the way I'm running my business, but actually optimized with the tools that I'm actually currently using. Next comes actually the technology and the tools that could actually give me a jump start, could actually help me leap over to true maturity in some senses. The third element that actually one looks at is what technology, what tools will come into play. You have cloud that actually provides you with a kind of seamless scale. That's actually one element that could come in. The second element that you can look at is actually how do I secure my enterprise? How do I actually ensure that my enterprise is actually secure? By the way, the interesting aside at this time is that the pandemic has actually been very telling, not only from the point of view of how businesses have actually struggled to keep running initially, but it's also been actually, it's exposed the chinks in the armor because the threats have gone up by 300% actually in the interim, which means that many organizations have actually become victims of ransomware. People have actually and it's all in the news. I don't have to actually share any names over here. It's all public information. So organizations which have actually been a little have been laggards in this area, they've started actually they've become the victims of actually malware and ransomware attacks. Coming back to the maturity curve, standardization, optimization, then actually comes your usage of tools. What technology tools that you're actually looking at, what will actually give you a throughput which is actually really very good. Payloads are, I call it the payloads for workloads. The meaning of payloads for workloads is that do I go cloud all the way, or do I actually pick and choose the workloads that will actually be optimal on cloud? Do I need to actually rehost the platform or recode the platform or actually replatform it, or even retire some of the applications and stuff like that? So that's actually third element of the journey. Now, if I actually look at all of these elements, your technology and tools have started coming in now. this is actually an evolving process, and finally it will reach a stage where everything is actually digital. You think digital, and we have a nice phrase to define these companies. Born digital are organizations that actually started off from a, from in the dormitory of a campus. They actually did a lot of coding on the cloud. Software is actually key to this, and because of that, they were able to actually keep their costs really low. They didn't actually have a baggage to carry, and they expanded on the cloud. And you can think about any of these born digital organizations, all of them actually have been resilient. Whether it's food tech or it's actually e-commerce, they've all actually been standing. So this element of actually identifying what processes work for you best, how do I optimize the process, look at the technology tools that will actually do, and going all the way digital is actually in my experience some of the best approaches to actually going digital. Organizations that decide to actually jump in with the tool approach, saying that I want to go the digital transformation way, so I have got $1 million, so let me just actually think about getting about people who will actually come in, redefine some of these processes, and then start actually thinking and adapting tools to my processes rather than the other way around, will actually flounder. And those are actually categorized as fashionistas. I repeat one thing back again. Digital transformation is to actually provide tangible outcomes, actually, Samir, in these 4 areas. How do I better engage with my customer, which is customer experience? How do I make my employee, my workforce productive, irrespective of where they are from? Work from anywhere, but being equally productive or more productive. How do I actually keep my business running, which is actually governance, which is risk management and compliance, because compliance is an important element as well.
Sure.
And the last part is actually how do I enhance my processes? How do I use tools, technology tools, to actually keep enhancing my processes to ensure that I do better and stuff like that. So these are 4 key outcomes that will come in under stark scrutiny all the time for an organization looking at digital transformation. Does it answer the question, Samir?
Absolutely. I think you touched brilliantly all these 4 points, and also I think in a way it's so well resonates in terms of what enterprises or CXO should look as part of weaving that DNA or fabric in terms of going end to end. So one of the questions I want to take, Lux, is artificial intelligence. I mean, there has been a great talk about AI, and the underpinning of digital transformation is AI. And specifically, many of the organizations today are getting enamored by saying, look, we want to fire the best of machine-enabled kind of algorithms to kind of look at how our new age processes or new age kind of, let's say, working rhythm looks like. Now, having said that, again, it's like maybe coming from some of the organizations where they have embedded algorithms as part of their entire DNA and even business strategy. How do you see this whole, what I call intertwining of AI and digital transformation together? And what kind of, let's say, aspects of consideration strategically CXOs or enterprises need to make when they talk about AI adoption in the digital transformation context?
Great question, and I think the time for AI has come now in many ways. The ability of actually systems to do cognitive stuff is actually very, very critical, and I think AI is being spoken about from 60s. There's been talk about AI from 60s onwards, but it's actually the perfect storm right now. The kind of technology tools, the processing ability, the need that is actually there, and the requirement actually of a huge demand from the market is actually pitchforking AI into center stage in many ways. I'll take a simple example of customer experience. In a very uncomplicated time when contact center was actually a very important a part of how you engage customers, having a toll-free number and having some agent sitting in the office was actually nirvana, right? I mean, people actually could call you and they could reach you, and that was actually the channel of communication. Over a period of time, the contact centers actually gave way to things such as omni-channel, and how you could actually engage your customers on multiple channels. Think of it as actually WhatsApp, think of it as actually multiple channels and things like that. So you still had to be relevant. If the ubiquitous telephone, the toll-free number gave way to an email, then it actually went this SMS way, and then you actually had a lot more other channels that actually came in, social media as a channel and things like that. Now, when you really look at all of these are actually, not, they don't have actually, cognitive ability built in. It is still actually, incumbent on, someone who's actually, addressing these to actually address the problems, the requirements that are coming about. Of course, actually, about 3-4 years ago, chatbots came into being. Chatbots actually, had this, whether it's actually, virtual assistants or chatbots, they brought in an element which was actually more of, what could I actually do without a machine interface, and how could I actually engage better? They were always on. It wasn't actually, warm bodies which are actually addressing this. And chatbots, continued to actually evolve over a period of time. And you had another, branch which was actually RPA that was coming in. So to me, all of the confluence of all of these technologies actually, will lead to a true artificial intelligence kind of a setup, where it doesn't matter where the call lands. The machine's ability, the system's ability is to actually identify the requirement, address the requirement, provide the most optimal solution to the caller who's actually calling in, channel it to a human agent actually where it is needed, ensure that it is actually closed, have the relevant and the right contextual information coming in, provide suggestions so that we don't have to go through frustration actually, dealing with the call center agent who's actually, asking you to repeat to the 10th agent the same thing that you've actually been experiencing. All of this makes it for a friction-free, seamless engagement for an organization. And I just took the example of, a contact center. Artificial intelligence actually comes into play, when it comes to employee safety. It comes into play in actually in terms of, managing, the workplaces or actually employee experience. There's this interesting webinar I was actually doing along with our partners, NICE, yesterday. And this whole concept was actually about, workplace transformation, how workplaces have actually become different today. And self-service is a very, very critical element of, how artificial intelligence can help, address actually needs better. So you don't actually have to wait for a long time for you to actually, be productive. New employees are getting onboarded now, and our AI comes into play over there as well. To me, AI is a layer whose time has come now, Samir. And AI actually cannot be treated independently. AI is actually a layer that will bring in cognitive ability to any system. And I actually use the word any system very consciously. The ability of AI to bring in value cuts across everything. It could be processes, it could be actually moments of truth, it could be actually experiences. Everything and anything that actually is a digital foundation can actually be enhanced significantly by the AI layer. It helps in safety, experience, interactions, and helps actually, overall do things better, so that, human cognitive ability is used for actually, truly thinking and actually coming up with solutions that need not actually involve grunt work.
Brilliant. Lux, we would have definitely loved to continue. We've had time, but I must say, absorbing, engaging, enthralling. Uh, what you talked about made so much sense because this clearly depicts the whole aspect how the conversations within the CXO community, within the boardrooms, and within the enterprises are going. Because each one of your narrative was punctuated and accentuated by a lot of anecdotes, real life examples, and how the use cases are being dealt with today.
Yeah.
The whole aspect about unprecedented situation was best amplified by you calling out this whole aspect of digital transformation, not only getting more accelerated, but getting reset and redefined with a new playbook. And that's exactly what you demonstrated in last 60 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate. I'm sure, gauging by the experience in terms of the questions we had, the audience also loved it. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Samir, for hosting me. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.